Welcome to Healthy Mindset Miracles. My name is Tanisha, and I am so excited to have Jason Tuttle with us today. He has an incredible story. It's a sad story, but it is the story of overcoming and resilience for sure. Jason, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being on.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you have created an entire organization called Letters to Zachary, which has to do with the fact that you are a father of two special needs children with mental and physical disabilities, and one of them at the age of 15, unfortunately, is no longer with us. Correct?
That is correct.
Tell us a little story. At what age did you find out about their disabilities?
Okay. I have a son and a daughter, and my wife and I got married in 2003. I am basically from the South. My wife is from the North. And I say that in the context of my wife is from the New England area. She's a cradle Catholic. And anybody that knows of those family, they are very large families. I am basically Southern, was Methodist all my life up until recently. And my side's a pretty small family. So when my wife and I met and we were dating and we decided we were going to get serious, her first response to me was, I want to have four kids. And so my response, as any man would be, was, "Whew, let's have one
And
and
see how that goes.
let's see how that goes. And I wasn't against it because at least at that point in life, I was still thinking I was going to have the three kids, the white picket fence, the
Mhm.
traditional, because my family, the one I grew up in, it was my parents and my two other brothers. So it was two parents, three kids, animals, that kind of thing. So about a year after we got married, we decided we wanted to start trying just because at the time that we got married, I was 26, my wife was 29. The women out there understand that once you hit your 30s, especially having kids, you start kind
Mm,
of increasing things for the Down syndrome type issues. And so my wife was just like, well, if we're going to have kids, we need to start now. And I said,
yeah.
okay, not a problem. And I mean, I was ready at that point. We were just like, well, let's full steam ahead. Let's go. So it didn't take us long to get pregnant. And then at that point, everything was fine. We had no reason to believe there was going to be any issues, any medical issues, anything. In fact,
Mhm.
during that time, my father got big into like ancestry.com and was doing kind of the genealogy stuff. He had gone back 10 generations in my family and there was nothing. And then my wife had talked to her family and they
Right.
went back like 5 generations and there was still nothing. Now, granted, historically speaking, anything before about the 19 probably 50s ish, there was kind of taboo to list that you had a child with, say, a Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, or so we can only go
Mhm.
back so far to actually find anything. At that point, like I said, nothing was really wrong. And then we got through the weeks just kept going by and we got to the week 20 appointment, which anybody that's having a child knows that's the appointment where you find out the sex of the child. Because
Right.
you get out of your first trimester, you're into your second trimester, and typically once you're in your second trimester, everything's kosher until birth, so to speak. So we go to that appointment, and all the way there, my wife didn't want to know, and I did want to know. My wife's view was, well, this is one of life's last great surprises. I'm a planner. I wanted to know just because I was setting up the nursery and I didn't want to paint neutral colors and I wanted to cater it to whatever the sex of the child was. We get into that
Mhm.
appointment and the ultrasound tech does her job. And she gets to that point and she goes, do you want to know the sex of the child? Because I'm almost to that point. And so we playfully go back and forth and, we're kind of bantering back and forth. She goes, I need to know because I've seen an issue. And we said, we want to
Mhm.
know. And she said, well, you're having a boy. And we said, well, what's the issue? And she goes, well, that's going to be a doctor kind of thing for you. She said, but I needed to know the sex of the child. I said, well, why did you need to know the sex? She said, well, in boys, if it's what I think it is, she said it's considered rare. If it's in girls, it's even rarer. And so I
Oh,
needed to know.
wow.
From that point, we started seeing a perinatalogist, which is basically just a OBGYN that deals with high risk pregnancies, is what a perinatalogist does. And from week 20 all the way up until she gave birth 38. So up until week 38, we kept seeing a perinatalogist and they went over every possible doom and gloom scenario at that point. We didn't know officially what my son's issue or issues were. We just knew that at that point he was born with one kidney. That one kidney has sustained some damage in utero and was
Mm.
continuing to sustain some damage. He was born with missing areas of white matter on his brain. And I think that's it. But they gave us a lot of other scenarios of what it could be. As
Mm.
you can imagine, as a young couple, that this is our first child, and all of a sudden we're just getting hit with all these major medical issues. The day comes where my wife's going into labor. I'm driving her across the city to the hospital. We get there. In fact, she's getting to the point. Now, my wife is 5'4" and at the time was about 150, 160 pounds pregnant. And my son was eventually born at 9 pounds, 10 ounces, was like 30
Oh
some
my
inch,
goodness.
was 30 something inches long. And
Where
that
did she put
evening,
him in her small little body?
yeah, she was all baby.
Wow.
And so that evening, the day that my son was born, he was actually not supposed to come for another week. He was just like, forget this, I'm coming tonight. And even that night, he was like, contractions were coming so fast that they had to slow him down because
Wow.
my wife was scheduled for a C-section. With as big as my son was, there's no way that she could have naturally, just for her size. And
Mm.
she had our son. They wrapped him up. We saw him for about 30 seconds, and then they took him to the NICU at the hospital we were in. My wife went off to like recovering because like she got nauseous from the epidural, which is pretty common. And then I went up to the NICU, and I'll never forget, this Indian doctor came up to me and goes, well, your son was born with a rare condition called Eagle Barrett syndrome. And I said, what? And he kind of told me what it was. And he goes, what's going to happen is we're going to monitor him overnight. The local children's hospital from the north side of Atlanta is going to bring their transport team down to come get him. And he's going to go up to their NICU to watch for, at that point, we didn't know how long. I looked at the doctor and said, okay, his mother has not seen him yet. And I said, this child is not leaving this hospital until his mother, of all people who carried him for 9 months, at least gets a
Mhm.
moment to see him before he leaves. I mean, I joked with him, but I said, I'm not going to live the rest of my life having to live that down. I said, she's going to see him. He chuckled and he said, that's not a problem. They'll bring him up to the room and everything. So he gets taken off to the local children's hospital. Nowadays, when it comes to C-sections and all, typically women are in and out in about 3 days. He was born in 2006. And it surprised me with the fact that she had a C-section. And as major of a surgery as that was, we were in and out in 3 days. The day she had it, they said, you can rest for the next 18 hours, but in 18 hours, you're getting up and walking. And I looked at him and I went, now, granted, I'm very straightforward. You just gutted my wife like a deer, and now you want her to get up and walk 18 hours after the fact? And they said, yep. And I said, what's the reasoning? And they said, well, first of all, the more you lay down, more risk of blood clots. And then we've learned that the more you agitate the system, the more it makes it want to heal faster. And so
Mm.
I went, okay. But my wife, instead of being there 3 days, on the second day was just like, I've had enough of this. I want to see my son. And we walked out the door in 2 days instead of three. That was a feat unto itself. Kind of the latter end of kind of this part of our lives is we get up to the hospital. My son's in the NICU up there for approximately 11 days after he's born. They kind of drop the medical hammer on us. They go, well, not only does he have the Eagle Barrett syndrome, we think he's going to have neurological delays and urological issues
Mm.
and respiratory issues. And they just lay it all out on us. And that was the first probably 12 days of us being parents is what that was.
Wow. That is
So,
really hard conversation to have with a
mhm,
parent, let alone being the parent that
mm.
actually has to come to realization that we just had this miracle baby come into this world and now we have all these things to deal with. And so, what was your mindset and your wife's mindset at the time when you heard this news?
The irony of what I'm about to say, based on what this podcast is going to be out, there was a period of grief because
Mm.
we went from everything was fine, we have no issues, we have no reason to believe there's any issues, to almost grieving what our life was or was going to be, to where this is what it is. In the beginning, we had those moments where, for lack of better words, life just sucked. And just because we went from raising kids is never easy per se, but we went from moderately difficult to very difficult in the blink of an eye.
Did you guys
Go
have a lot of medical personnel coming in and out of your home when you brought him home?
No, essentially what had happened was, while we were up in the NICU at the Children's Hospital, they had a team of people that came in there. And I'll never forget it. About Wednesday of that week, I think my wife was, she might either, she was either working from home, or I don't know why she wasn't up there, but I went up there to see our son, and my parents happened to be up there spending time with him. And I'm kind of looking in his crib where he's sitting in kind of this open bay that they've got him in. And the head nurse comes up to me. I'll never forget, it was to my left side. She just starts listing all of these different things that they think of what's going on and what they're going to do and what they think the prognosis is. And at that point, it just hits me like like I lose it. I'm just bawling. You know, I've had moments where before everything that has currently happened, I've had moments here and there where I've gotten emotional, but nothing like this. I mean, it's just like all of a sudden out of the blue, a Mack truck came out of nowhere and just ran me over. And I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to take it. It was just so much sitting on top of me, especially with the traditional sense of, well, I'm the protector, I'm the caretaker, I'm supposed to make things right, make sure things are okay, and kind of take on the burden of the family, but just in the traditional sense of being the husband. And it just, it hit me hard. And then a few minutes later, my parents took me down to the cafeteria so we could have some lunch. And right in the middle of lunch, again, it just hit me like a Mack truck. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm thinking, well, is my insurance going to be enough for this? How am I going to afford this? What's life going to be like? Is just all these emotions kind of running through me.
After you guys got home from the hospital with your
Mhm.
son, how old was he when you got to take him home?
He was only probably 13 or 14 days old. We were in that NICU a little less than 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. We weren't in there months per se or any grand length of time. We were in there a lot more than what we ever thought we would have been in there.
Mhm. Now, did you guys have round the clock care that you had to give him?
Not initially. And I say
Okay.
that because, at least for the first about 5 years of his life, we were, I hate to say it, but kind of winging it, because
Mhm.
we would learn one thing or one characteristic, and then something else would pop up, and we'd have to learn that, and then we would learn all that, and then something else would pop up. And so by the time we hit about our fifth year, at that point, I had literally seen enough of everything where not a whole lot really surprised me. And so it was kind of trial and error, if you will. But in that
Mhm.
5 years, like my son's rare condition, one of the side effects of his rare condition was he was susceptible to respiratory illnesses, meaning if he got like
Mm.
a pneumonia style cold in the beginning, if I didn't catch it fast enough, we were ultimately always admitted to admitted back into the ICU at the children's hospital we went to. And for the first
Mm.
5 years of his life, we were in and out of that hospital every 6 months.
So, did he ever have an opportunity to go to school, or did you guys homeschool him due to, the fear of him getting sick?
What basically happened was at the time, my degrees in education, I taught elementary school physical education for 8.5 years before I left to become a stay-at-home parent. And in that first year that I was still working and with my son and his issue, it was actually at the school I was at. One of the parents who was a stay at home mother that had like 5 or 6 kids that literally lived 2 streets down from the school I was working at said, if you need somebody to watch them, I'll watch them. She said, I know daycares are really expensive. All I'll ask is just kind of a fraction of what you would pay for daycare. I mean, like I literally paid her like maybe 150 dollars a week for her to
Mhm.
watch them, which, we all know what daycare is. That's a
Yeah.
steal. She watched them until the end of the school year. And then at the time, my parents were young enough to where they watched them as I worked until my son was, I think he was 4. And in the county next to mine, there's a private special needs school that he got admitted to that he went to for 2 or 3 years. And so did his sister, because his sister has medical disabilities and all that. And the only reason why we left that school was because special needs schools are great, but they're all out of pocket. And even with the scholarships we were getting for that school, with 2 kids with multiple disabilities going to this school, and every year getting even more expensive, we just finally got to a point where we couldn't afford it anymore, especially on what I was making. And then we transitioned them into the county that we live in, and they've been doing self-contained special education classrooms ever since.
So there was no way you could sign up to get a grant to go to private school.
Well, I'm in Georgia, and in the state of Georgia, it was after we had left the private special needs school that they came up with a bill called SB 10, which basically meant that if you had a child in a public school system setting and you could prove that the school system was not meeting their needs, then the state of Georgia would give you it wouldn't pay for everything, but a reasonable stipend to give to you to allow you to go to a private school that would meet their needs is essentially what would
Okay.
come down. However, trying to prove that the county school system was not meeting your child's needs was rather difficult. Now, granted, the
Yeah.
teachers that my kids had, I really liked. I thought they were meeting the needs, and so I never really felt the need to pursue that.
Right. It's so crazy how every state is different when it comes to that, but I think it should be like worldwide that they have some type of funding for children with disabilities, such as your children,
Mhm.
for them to go to private school because them being in public school, well, public school is not good for any kids nowadays.
When I'm back in the school system, I'm not. I was a certified teacher, but I was gone for so long that my certifications lapsed. So I'm back in as a paraprofessional or teacher's aide right now, and
Right.
I'm actually back into I'm in a self-contained environment as well. And even I would probably agree with that statement.
It's pretty crazy how things have changed from the time that I'm 45, yeah, and I don't know how young you are, but at my age, when I was younger, schooling was so different than what I see today. My daughter's now 18. Let's just talk about the elementary school alone.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult for her to be in public school in the elementary school system. Even though she had an IEP, they
Mm-hmm.
still were not being able to follow through with the services that she needed to be able
Yep.
to help her stay focused and follow through with studies. And I ended up having to put her into private school
Mm-hmm.
because of that. And then eventually her last 2 years of school, or 3 years now, she's done homeschooling because it's really difficult as a parent to see your child falling behind and not being able to grasp when they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because nowadays teachers are more like babysitters than they are teachers
Mhm.
teaching anything because students have so many challenges of behavioral challenges. They're dealing with the behaviors more so than they can teach a class. And so when you've got a child that already has disabilities, it's impossible for them to sit and focus on anything because of so much that's going on around them. Is that what you've seen too for your own child during that time?
N Honestly, I've been very fortunate where I've had some very caring, understanding, willing to work with my kids kind of teachers. Now, granted, I tend to think of myself as maybe not the norm as it comes to parents, in the sense of I worked in the school system. I'm currently working in the school system. So I've got kind of an inside view outside of the fact that I've been doing the whole special needs journey for now 18 years. And so, like,
Yeah.
I have told my son and my daughter's teachers, I said, look, I said, I'm hopeful that X, Y, and Z will happen. However, I am realistic in the sense that, you know, m- my daughter, who's still around, she'll be 16 this year, but she neurologically functions 4 to 6 years old. And the fact
Mhm.
that the older she gets, the bigger that gap gets. Would I love her to get all the way up to 16 years old? Yes. Is that gap insurmountable at this point? Most likely, yes. That's a large gap to overcome. In the sense, I get along with the teachers well just because I'm just like, look, I'm more thinking now, instead of worrying about math, science, and all that, I'm more concerned about you teaching them life skills
Mhm.
on how to do things versus necessarily understanding the science of something or the math of something. Yeah, they need to know that, but she needs to know a little more basic skill versus that before she gets to that point. And then
Right.
on the education side of me working there, the number one complaint I have about working in a self-contained environment is I've run across numerous parents that when they hand their child off to me as the teacher per se, they may not say, but I get this body language of they are now your problem for 7.5 hours, because now that child may be a lot to handle. I get it. I've had moments in my life where I've had a lot going on, but I have seen that it's your problem kind of mentality more often than not. And I want to, but yet when I don't do something that they request and they get upset at me, I go, how are you getting upset at me when we send you stuff home and you refuse to do it, but then you
Right.
wonder why they're not making any progress?
Right.
It's not working here. We can only do so much in a 7.5 hour a day because your kid is not the only child in that room. And I'm not using that as an
Right.
excuse, but I've got three other kids that all have similar kind of obstacles that I have to work with on top of your child. You have to
Mhm.
help at home.
Right. I agree with that 100%. I had to be able to teach my daughter behavioral skills and to teach her how to be able to handle certain things. So when she did go to school, she could handle the environment that was going on around her.
Mhm,
Today, she's 18 years old and even though she does have her moments, she
mhm,
also has the most positive mindset now. And a lot of people don't even realize she has a disability unless they get to know her a little bit longer and then they would see it. But I was even telling her today how proud I am of her, the things that she's
mhm,
learned, how she's been able to overcome those challenges because she's been taught how to focus, how to not allow negative thoughts to control her mind, how
mhm,
to, like, if she can't do something, it's okay, that she doesn't have to get upset, that she can go back to it if she needs to, just little life skills like that. But
mhm,
like you said, it is the parents' job to teach them those life skills as well.
mhm. Exactly.
I 100% agree with that. So we'll go back to your son. You had to end up homeschooling him, correct?
No, he was in the county school. I don't, even though I've worked in education, I don't have the patience or the understanding to do homeschooling. So any parent that decides that they want to until they graduate, I have all the respect in the world for them. But I did work very closely with the educators that he did have, especially with the fact that I was a stay-at-home father for 12 years of his life.
Okay, so you were the stay-at-home, you didn't homeschool him, okay, and
No.
then and by you being stay-at-home, how do you think that helped him with you being present in his schooling, though? You had that relationship with the teachers, you had that relationship with the school. Being a father of somebody who has a disability such as your son, how do you
Uh-huh.
think that helped him with his education?
I think just the consistency of it, because even with his sister now, I was constantly telling him, just because you do this at school, you still have to do it at home. Don't think because you can come home. Well, we're home with daddy, and we don't have to do it anymore. That's not how it works. You have to, if you're learning to walk at school, or you're learning to use your silverware, or you're learning to whatever it is, you still have to do it at home. This is something that
Mhm,
you do no matter the situation that you're in. And so I think that really that helped them in the sense of I was trying to make it as uniform as possible at home. However, one of the difficult parts is I'd go into these IEP meetings for both of my son and daughter, and I would have a OT, PT, and speech for both of them.
mhm,
OT, PT, and speech all had 4 different things I needed to work on for each child, and they would all say,
mhm,
"Well, all of these things are important." I said, "My kids get home at 3:30. I get them kinda changed to relax and going at about 4. Assuming I don't give them a bath that evening, I have to get dinner ready, get them going. After that, if I do give them a bath, and then I said, if I do all of this stuff, they will never have any free time." And I said, I'm very much a big proponent that when they come home, I'm going to give them time just to veg out for a minute. They've been in
mhm,
schools, even with their disabilities, they've been in school 7.5 hours of a day. I'm not going to just ram it down their throat the moment they get home. And so I finally in the IEP meeting said, look, all of you come up with your top thing that I need to work on. If we get through it fast or we master it, then or you come up with a list that this is top priority, this is number two, this is number three, this is number four, and then I'll do it that way. I said, because otherwise there's not enough time in the day.
exactly. I
So,
agree with that, because when we did our IUP, it was ABA therapy, language
mhm,
therapy, we had sensory therapy, we had all of
mhm,
that, and it was a lot. It was
mhm,
truly a lot, and especially when a child with disabilities, when they come home, they're already on overload,
mhm,
and so sensory overload, all kinds of
mhm.
overload, so they do need that time to just kinda relax a little bit. I mean, it's the same with anybody. If you were at work all day long, you come
Yep,
home, the first thing you wanna do is kick your shoes off. You don't
exactly.
wanna talk about work or anything of that manner. So, I agree with you 100%. Give them that time to relax, and then if there's
Mhm,
something that you can work with them for 30 minutes a day. For
mhm.
me, it was my daughter and I, we got home at 3:30. I let her relax. We put her stuff away. She was very OCD about things had to be a
Yep.
certain place in a certain way.
Mhm,
And so we made sure that she had the things that she needed and a certain thing, certain way. Everything was a routine. So it was get home at 3:30, 4 o'clock. We would do dinner and then therapy. And then 7 o'clock, we'd take a bath. And about 8:30, she was in bed. Those are the things that were really important to have that routine for her. And I think that's what
mhm.
you were saying that you did with yours.
Yes, as a stay-at-home father for 12 years, I'm routine oriented naturally, but for my kids, I noticed that they function better when they knew what was
Mhm.
coming and it was literally the same thing every day. So, for example, when because I had 2 kids in wheelchairs, the lift bus came directly to my house. And
Mm.
what would happen would be they would get home at 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'd bring them both in. I'd position their wheelchairs. I'd lock their wheels. I'd get one out, put them on the floor. I'd get her out, put her on the floor. I'd move their wheelchairs out of the way. I'd get their shoes and their braces off. I'd put all that on their wheelchairs. I'd undress them to get them kind of in there what they would lounge in at the house. Both of my kids always wore diapers, so I'd change their diaper and I put on a new diaper for them, and I'd get them kind of in their lounge wear, and then I would get them their toys, and I'd go make them a beverage, and they'd have that, and then if I wasn't giving him a bath that night, we'd have some lounge time and then I would go and cook dinner. My kids could walk with assistance, but not by themselves. So I
Right.
either had to walk behind them or I would have to carry them. And so
Mhm.
when dinner time came around, I'd either walk them to the kitchen table or I would literally carry them and put them in a chair at the kitchen table. And I'd have one child over here and one child over here, and I'd feed one bite and feed the other one the other bite, and I'd do that back and forth till they finished. And then, we again, if I wasn't giving them a bath, I would sit them in, their chair and their spots on the couch and give them their toys, and we'd lounge for a while, and then right about 10 minutes before bedtime, both of them took several seizure medications. So I'd prep their medicines. I'd get them both on the floor. I'd give them their medications. I'd change them again. And then my daughter would go to bed about 7:30. I'd keep my son up for about another hour longer. Then I'd put my son to bed. And then my wife and I would be in our room till whenever we went to bed. And it would be wash, rinse, and repeat every day.
Just listening to that is exhausting. I can't imagine, like, all of the energy that you had to have to even do all of that. That's first of all, my heart goes out to you because that was a lot. And I know that you're a phenomenal father to even just take the time to be selfless enough to help this other human being to live a life the way that you've been able to give them. And we're going to get into the part of the grieving your son
Okay.
because unfortunately he's no longer here with us. So
Correct.
he lived 15 years of his life with you.
Yep.
I don't know how comfortable you feel about how he passed away. That's up to
Okay.
you if you want to share that, but you did start letters to Zachary because that was your way of grieving, was to write
Hmm.
letters to him. So I'm gonna let you go
Yes.
ahead and take the story from there.
Okay, so my son, of the two of my son and daughter, he was always the more medically fragile. He was the one that spent the most time in the hospital. So let's see if I can condense this story because it can be lengthy. About 3 days before he passed, he came home. I made him one of his favorite meals. He ate like a horse. I put his sister to bed about 7:30. I kept him up about an hour longer just to give him some one-on-one time with myself and his mother. And that night we went to go brush his teeth, and he gagged and threw up a little bit. Didn't think much about it. We thought, we probably hit his gag reflex and there was something in there and just came up. So we put him to bed that night, and he has been a good sleeper since day one. We have never had sleeping issues with either of them. And so that night he was up and down all night, didn't really want to sleep, that kind of thing. And for both of us, we were just kind of like, that's unusual. And so I was a stay-at-home parent at the time, and I just told my wife, I said, I'm gonna keep him home tomorrow. He may have a 24-hour virus, which he's gotten many times in his life. And I said, I'm gonna keep him home because if he's contagious, I don't want to send him to a self-contained classroom with other medically fragile children and spread it
Mhm.
around. So I texted his teacher that next morning and said, hey, I'm gonna keep him home. She said, great, we'll see. Let's see, that's Thursday. The night before was Wednesday. That was Thursday. And I said, if he's feeling better, I'll send him back Friday. Okay, great. We'll see him Friday. Well, sent my daughter off to school and I got him up. I let him rest and I got him up about 8:30 that morning. I sat him in his favorite chair and I told him, I said, buddy, you can crash anytime. I know you didn't sleep well last night. You're not missing anything. Daddy's going to be sitting on the couch with his laptop getting some work done. He refused to fall asleep on that Thursday. Couldn't figure out why. Didn't really want to drink a whole lot. For one day not drinking a lot, it didn't really strike me. Now, if it had gone more than one day, I would have gone, hey, something's going on. He's not wanting to drink. And so, but at that point, nothing struck me. And so we got to that evening, and that instead of keeping him up an hour, I just put him to bed at the same time as his sister. He got quiet instantly, didn't think anything about it. I just figured he was exhausted. He didn't sleep the night before, didn't sleep all day. I figured he just passed out because he was just so tired. I told my wife at that point, I said, I'm gonna keep him out on Friday. I said, if he's not feeling well, I said, at least we've got the weekend to get through. And then when he feels better, we can send him back on Monday. Same thing, texted his teacher. She said, okay, see you Monday. Got my daughter up on that Friday, sent her off to school, waited till about the normal time that we would get our kids up on the weekend, walked into his room. Now, typically when I walk into his room, he'll bounce and get really excited and be happy to see me and all that. And when I walked in there, he was awake, kind of looking at me, but he didn't really bounce, and he was just kind of laying there, and that struck me. And so I went over to his right side, and I noticed a dark green streak of liquid coming out of his mouth. And in all the medical dramas I've watched, I went, huh. The only thing that's dark green is bile. And why is bile coming out of his mouth? This is not good. And so I go to pick him up, and he's floppy and lethargic. And that didn't really strike me because I've had one or two times where he was really sick with like a respiratory virus, and he had been that way. And so nothing really sent off signals to me to say, hey, something's really serious. So I get him out in the living room, and I do my medical protocol in my head. I give him a catheter because his rare condition, from time to time, I'd have to drain his bladder with a catheter. So I did that, didn't get a whole lot out. And typically, because of his rare condition, typically his midsection was kind of pliable and spongy. Well, that day it was rock hard, like brick rock hard, and it caught my attention.
Mm.
And so, I'm kind of in my, even though things are going in real time in my head, it's slowing down just so I can comprehend what's going on and trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I just look at my wife and I go, something's not right. And it was honestly just a hunch. I went, I'm gonna take him up to the children's hospital. I said, something's off, and I don't know what it is. And you know, because my son was nonverbal, I got to where I could read nonverbal cues from him very well, like to the point I almost knew he was sick before he was sick. And
Mhm.
so I said, I'm gonna get him dressed. I'm gonna put him in his chair. We're going up to the hospital. My wife said, okay. My wife was working at home at the time. And so I get him in the van, and like, I'm in Atlanta. I'm on the southwest side of Atlanta. The hospital that he goes to, the children's hospital, is on the northwest side of, excuse me, no, northeast side of Atlanta. It's 65 miles from where I live. And that sounds like a lot, but anybody that lives in Atlanta know that Atlanta takes up North Georgia, and 65 miles is nothing. And so I get on the interstate from where I'm at, and I'm doing like 90 up there because I don't know what's going on. At the time, I think he's fallen asleep and waking up. What I later realize is he's fallen in and out of consciousness, and I don't
Mm.
realize it at the time. So I get through Atlanta with Atlanta's horrible traffic. I get to the hospital. I get him out of the van at the hospital, and he's very floppy. Like, it catches my attention. I go, ooh, something's really wrong. So I get up to the ER. I skip the line, and before I can get up to the nurse's station, the security guard comes over to me as if to yell at me to say, hey, you need to get in line. And before he can say anything, I go, he's not breathing. I need help now. And so he
Mm.
looks at the nurse and kind of whistles at her. She comes over. I'd been in this hospital 100 times. I've been in this ER probably 20 times. This is the first time I'd ever, with my son in his wheelchair, went at a full run as fast as I could run to an ER trauma room. We get in there. I instinctively get him out of his chair, put him on the table, and I back out of the way in hopes that they'll let me stay in there while they work on him because he's nonverbal, and he can't say anything to me. Luckily, they do. There's another trauma room that's right next to us, and the double doors are open. And I kind of back off into there to let all the people, because like literally 30 people came out of nowhere to start working on him. And so they immediately come in there. They cut all of his clothes off of him. And the first thing that catches my attention is this guy takes this like drill looking thing and drills something directly into his knee. No pain medicine, nothing.
Mm.
And for a normal person, when you drill into bone, you'd probably jump out of your skin based on the amount of pain that it would have been. He never even flinched. And so
Mm.
I later found out that was some sort of port to get like medication or antibiotics into him very quickly. And he did that, and they intubated him, which, for those that don't know, that's putting the tube into you to get into your lungs to get air into your lungs. and they do that for a minute, and they start CPR and they start doing chest compressions. Well, the head ER doc comes over to me and goes, "How long has he been this way up to the minute to the best of your recollection?" And I tell her, she goes off, she barks orders at him. She comes back, she goes, "Explain to me this scenario as to why you brought him up here." And I told her. She goes back off and barks orders at him. And then no more than she does that, they get the paddles out. And, it's like the old, they get out, they rub them together with the gel on them. Nowadays, it's not that. It's more like stickers that they put on them. And it's like an Xbox looking thing that they've got off to the side. And I hear them yell, "Clear." And they hit it. And he literally raises off the table like what they do, like a medical drama. Now, what I'm watching is I'm watching that monitor for his respiratory rate because I'm so used to looking at it for all of his respiratory related illnesses. And it goes boop and goes right back to what it's doing. And in that moment in my brain, even though it doesn't register in my brain, I go, he's not coming back.
Mm,
Now, at this point, they had been working on him about 10 minutes. They continued doing this entire scenario for 45 continuous more minutes. It was the longest I would. In fact, I told the ER doc, I said, "TV doesn't do y'all justice." I said, "Because I never expected y'all to work that long trying to save my son's life." And I said, "And I do appreciate it." But so they do that. It comes down to where they eventually shock him 4 or 5 more times, and and nothing works. And she finally walks over to me and goes, "Well, we can shock him again," but she said, "I think the outcome's going to be the same." And I said, "Well, this is out of my medical wheelhouse. It's up to your professional opinion. Do what you got to do." And so they do it one more time and they pronounce them. I walk off into
mm,
the other room and kind of I have a moment for myself as anyone would. And then I immediately have to compartmentalize because I'm just like, I need to know answers for all these different things. It'll make me feel better in this moment despite what I'm witnessing. And so before that, I have to call his mother, who thinks at the moment that I'm calling him that he was going to be admitted. He'd be there 7 or 8 days and he'd come back home, to tell her that her son was dead on a table. I will never
mm.
forget the sound she made over that phone. And then I had to call my mother, his grandmother, who watched him a lot, the same thing. And I'll never forget her response. Now, later on down the road, my mother goes, "You were oddly calm when you called me." She said, "You just watched Zachary die, and it was like nothing had happened." And I said, "I had to be that way because I needed to know certain things so that I could relate it to you guys and for." Are they going to do an autopsy? Who do I need to contact to get him to a funeral home? All those kind of answers. And so the care team comes in, we get all that answered, and they let me stay with my son. They said, "We don't need this trauma room for anytime soon. You can't be here all day, but we don't necessarily need it anytime soon." And so I'm sitting there with my son waiting because my wife is having her parents drive her up. And so I'm waiting on them to come up. And the two things I'll never forget is one, how fast he went from a warm temperature to ice cold. And then after we had spent our time with him and we left him there, like to go home to go to a funeral home, I had to pile up all of his cut off clothes on his empty wheelchair and walk it through that hospital to put it in our van to drive 65 miles home without him. That was the longest, quietest drive I have ever had. I'll never forget it. And so, you know, that was from the start to finish per se, it was 36 hours before it was that fast. 36 hours
Mm.
sounds like a lot of time, but in reality, it's not.
Well, and you weren't even prepared because you weren't expecting that to be the outcome.
No,
Mhm.
as a special needs parent with a child with a chronic illness, it's always kind of on the back of your mind that it's a possibility, but you don't really think it's ever going to come to fruition.
Right. So you obviously had to go through various different stages of grieving, and one
Mhm,
stage that you went through was writing letters to Zachary. When did
mhm.
that start?
I'm a big proponent of therapy and counseling. And right after everything had happened, I started going back to therapy. And it was probably about the fifth or sixth session I had gone back because at that point I was going weekly. It was my therapist that said, "Have you ever thought about journaling?" And the irony of all of this is I went, I don't know how good of a writer I am. I don't know if that's my thing. And she
Mhm.
goes, "Well, keep it on the back burner." She said, "Even if you don't do anything, keep it as an option." She said, "Even if you write it out and then burn it, at least you're getting it out. You don't necessarily have to
Mhm.
share it with anybody." And even still, it was probably 8 months that it sat on my side table before I ever wrote a letter. And even for about 2 or 3 more months after that, I wrote letters for me. I literally one day I was having a hard time dealing with losing my son, and so I got into a Word document and in proper letter form, a date, dear Zachary, and wrote in letter form exactly how I felt. And I mean, it was one of those. If I felt like I needed to have an expletive laden letter, then that's how I wrote it. If I was angry or mad, that's how I wrote it. And the kind of the shtick of letters to Zachary, and even people when I was first introducing them to just my writing is, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat. You need to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of this. If this is going
Mhm.
to offend you or trigger you, move on. I said, because I'm not
Mhm.
sugarcoating this. This is how I'm feeling exactly in the moment. I said, what you see on TV is great and wonderful, but that's not the reality of grief. Grief is ugly, especially in the beginning.
Very true.
And so I wrote it for myself, and I actually found a group that was parents who had lost a special needs child. I'm surprised I even found it because that's a very specialized niche group, and especially in grief. And so I got to know the
Mhm.
admin very well. And one day I just said, "Do you mind if I start post like my journal entry?" And she goes, "No, we'd love for you to have." She goes, "We get so few men in here that want to post." And so I did, and I had to prepare myself. I said, "No, I could get a really good response or I could get a very negative response, and I have to be prepared for both. So, am I willing to risk with the state of emotion I'm in right now to post this, knowing that I could get a negative response?" And so, the way I am in my brain, I went, "Screw it, I'll do it anyway." And so I posted in there and I immediately got a big response. I had a lot of the women in there, a lot of very positive response. I had one woman go, she said, "I have never told anybody exactly how I felt deep inside of me. I haven't told my husband, I haven't told my other kids, nothing. And you have nailed exactly how I feel word for word." And I said,
Wow.
"Well, I appreciate that it resonates with you." And I said that you could relate to it. I said, "But this is inspired by my son." And so for
Mhm.
weeks after that, about once a week, I would do it. And every time I was getting this kind of response. So if I hadn't have gotten those responses, we wouldn't even be talking here today. So I did that. And after several weeks, I started getting people going, "Well, have you ever thought this is really good? Have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" "No, I don't have the headspace for that at this point." "Well, have you ever thought about writing a book?" I don't, at that point, I didn't have what I thought was enough material to even start a book. And then
Did
so
you
they
keep
went
all
through.
your letters?
I do. I've got a 2-inch binder by my feet right now and
Wow.
I've got them in writing there, and I've got them saved on my laptop, and I've got them backed up just
Wow.
because at some point I may do it. And so I wanted to make sure that I had it. So we went through all these options. Finally, someone said, "Well, have you ever thought about doing like a Facebook page? At least at that point, you just copy and paste." And I said, "I could do that." And so I did that. And like a lot of pages, I start off with 10, 20 people on it, friends, family, that kind of thing. One day out of the blue, I was trying to raise money for my kids for a special needs live fan. I got kind of in that mindset again of, well, I need to promote it based on the response I was getting in this group. I feel like I've got something here. What can I do to promote it? So I started literally emailing some of what I consider the bigger names in the grief community. And I said, "Hey, my
Mhm.
name is so and so. I just started this page. This is from a father's perspective. I feel like I've got something here and I want to build on it. Can you just give me tips of things that worked for you and things that did not work for you?" And literally everybody was phenomenal. I had a woman with 1.5 million followers go, "Sure. Well, if you're going to write a book, then you want to do A, B, and C. If you're not going to write a book, you were going to want to do D, E, and F. This is what you're going to want to do. This is what you might want to shy away from." And so all
Right.
of them were that way. And now I'm in my ninth month of doing this. I've got over 1,000 followers. I've got representation in 44 of the 50 US states. And I've got representation in right now, I think it's 26 countries of those that follow the page. So if you'd have told me 9 months ago that I would be having this kind of following and doing your podcast, and actually right now, your podcast is my 31st episode in 9 months. Uh,
That's awesome. I love
and
it.
I'm, and I mean, I say that not to brag or anything, but I say that just because, again, if you'd have told me 9 months ago, I would have done 31 episodes of podcasts and, and done, I would have gone, you're out of your mind.
You're making a purpose for Zachary's life. And it's
Hmm.
amazing what you've done. And your purpose now is to help those that had children, whether they were handicapped or not. The grieving of a child is something that no parent should ever have to do, ever. But
Exactly.
you have probably healed numerous people that you've never met before just by your story and have helped them in their stages of grieving just by your story. And that's
Mhm.
making a purpose for Zachary. And it's a beautiful thing.
Oh, yeah. Initially the page started off as just for men because I couldn't find any men that maybe not the exact same thing I was going through, but something similar. And
Mhm.
then I did that for a while. And then I got to a point where it's just like, well, if I want a bigger following to reach more people, I've got to open it up more. And
Yes.
so it's still for men, but now it's for anybody that's lost someone. I lost a parent, a spouse, a child, a brother, a sister, that kind of thing. It's even evolved a little more in the sense of I'm here to kind of give the female gender an understanding of what it's like for a man to grieve, kind of give them an inside look of how men grieve, what the kind of the process is, what they can kind of do to help open their significant other, or at least make the circumstances favorable for them to open up. And
Yes.
so I feel like if I can do that, then whereas the man might not come to me directly, if the wife comes to him, he may come to me indirectly. Is kind
That's
of
awesome.
what it's evolved to.
Because some men are very, I don't want to say the word shy, but they're very secluded when it comes to
Mhm.
their grieving. And so what you're doing is showing them it's okay. It's okay
Certainly.
to show that vulnerability for sure.
Mhm.
Now, you told me about a coloring book that you were working on. Would you tell my audience about that?
Yes, a couple of weeks ago, and again, ironically, my podcasting search, I came across a publishing company that was offering up like I guess advertisement on like a news wire kind of thing to spread out to people that were in podcasts. And so I messaged her and I said, "Hey, I'd be interested. I don't have a podcast." I said, "But I do have a page." And I said, "I could certainly use the advertisement just because I'm kind of riding some momentum that I'd like to continue with." And so we got to talking, and said, "Well, honestly, I'd like to do something tangible that someone could hold in their hands. Because me personally, I'm very tactile, I'm very visual. And so
Mhm.
I'd like something for people to hold." And she said, "Well, you considering doing a book?" I said, "But I don't know if that's necessarily what I want." And so we sat back and kind of mulled on it. And I talked to her the next week. She said, "Have you ever thought about doing a coloring book?" And I said, "Well, that's a unique idea." And I said, "I'd certainly be open to it." And I said, "I'm of a generation, and to answer your question before, I'm 47. My
Very close to
generation,
my age.
my generation being Generation X, adult coloring books have become popular." And I said, "Well, I could certainly cater that to the adult side of this equation. And it's definitely always good for the kids' side of this equation." And so I said, "Great." I said, "Yeah, let's move forward on that." And so basically, what I did was I wanted a way to give back to the people that helped me out in the grief community. So essentially, what happened was we created the website Letters to Zachary, which will be in the bio that y'all will see. You would go to that page. Now, right now, it goes to the Belmont City Press, but eventually it'll be just Letters to Zachary. And so, what would happen was you would go to that page, you'd hit a button called Community Projects, and it would take you directly to a survey. And so, if you were someone that had lost a child or lost a loved one, you could go to that survey and fill out that survey. And so what it would ask would be like first name and last initial, the name of the person you lost. And then you'd go to the next part of the survey and it would tell you to list either small quotes or attributes about your loved one that you lost, that kind of thing. And you would compile all this information. And then what would happen would be it would send it to the artist. And then the artist would take either the quotes or the attributes and they would make one full coloring book page directly related to all of the information that you had listed there. So it would become an active and interactive memorial that you could hold in your hands for your loved one that you could purchase and other people could use that purchased it to kind of heal in the grieving process. So that was the first part of it. The second part of it was I've had a lot of people kind of like you that had a podcast or a foundation or a website or something that they were promoting. So the pitch to them was not only can you do that for your loved one, there's a spot on that survey on the back where you can put in information on that survey where it will list your podcast, your foundation, your website. So not only are you doing a memorial for your loved one on the back, you're getting advertisement in this book that anybody purchases that can direct them to your whatever you're promoting and you get free advertisement. So,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
the side note is that anybody that filled out the survey, it didn't cost them anything. So not only are you getting a page in this book free, you're also getting free advertisement in this at no cost to you. The only real cost is going to be is if you really want the coloring book, you're going to have to purchase it. And so, like I
Yeah,
tell people, let's say the book is $25. I said, who are you going to advertise with and only spend $25?
true.
And I
Nobody.
nobody. And so, and then the third fold and last fold of this is I wanted to do a coloring book because a lot of us like me, I have a daughter that lost her brother. So I could then
Mhm,
take this coloring book, give it to her, give her something that she really likes to do that's kind of a de-stressing activity that
mhm,
takes their mind off of what's happening. And then I, as the parent, while they're coloring, can kind of dumb down, if you will, difficult topics to talk to them while they're focused on their coloring to kind of help
right.
get them through that while they're doing this kind of mindfulness activity. And so that's the biggest reason why I did it because it was something that was simplistic, that was de stressing that we could do during this very difficult time. And
Mhm,
so, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Officially, right now, the release date is August 16th. So we've got about another month at this point before
mhm.
it's released.
That is amazing, and I am excited to look to see how this book turns out, and
Hmm.
I think your story, like you said, is gonna be so heartfelt for those that have lost loved
Hmm.
ones, but especially those that have lost children for sure. It also is something that children can use to help them,
Hmm.
this coloring book for sure, to help them overcome, the loss of their parent or
Hmm.
somebody that they love. So I love that idea.
I have to give the credit to the Belmont City Press, who I'm doing it through. When we were bouncing off ideas, they were the one that came up with it, and I just kind of ran with it. But it's my collaboration per se. And so, but yeah, I have yet to get any like cover artwork for it. I should be getting it anytime. And so I'm curious as to what the front of it'll look like at this point. So again, like I
I'm
said,
certainly
it'll be August 16th when it's released.
I love the idea. Thank you so much, Jason. This
Thank you.
has been so enlightening. In a lot of ways, it for me, I started tearing up a little bit. I was trying not to cry
Hmm.
because I don't want to like cause you to feel emotion while you're trying to tell your story, but it was so heartfelt. And my condolences to you and your family for the loss of your son,
Mhm,
but you are doing a very beautiful thing in his memory. And
mhm.
being a man that's grieving, putting that out there, I know is tough, but it's for a major good cause. And those of you that are
Certainly.
listening, Jason has a Facebook, a TikTok, a Twitter, an Instagram, and the website. All of those links
Mhm.
will be in the description and the bio. Whether you're going to be reading the blog or you're going to be seeing the YouTube video or going to our Facebook page, either way, it's all going to be there. And Jason, thank you so much for being with us. I greatly appreciate you, and give your family a hug for all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being on.
Absolutely.